Welcome back. Of course, you've had an idea of what's going on in the business world. Let's look at what's going on, not just within the shores. Yes, we're going to talk about what's happening within the shores of Nigeria. Let's step out a little bit. Our president's done a bit of traveling, as some will say, shuttle diplomacy across the world. And he's had some, what they say, very productive meetings. Certain relationships have been revived and strengthened here and there. We've had some other government officials visit Nigeria as well, all for diplomatic relations and bilateral talks. But in all of these things, how's it affecting Nigeria and her people? Well, to help us in this conversation, we have in the studio Professor Ademola Abbas, a global affairs expert and international law expert. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. Good morning.
Let's start from that general perspective. So we've seen our president move around a great deal, ECOWAS, AU, and then the world out there. And finally, G20, which just happened, and we have representation at COP29 and all of that. In all of that, how would you shape the president's, as some would say, shuttle diplomacy travels?
But thank you once again for having me. Look, I think it's always very interesting when you have a president who thrives, so to say, on multilateralism, engaging with international partners, global fora. And we've seen President Bola Tinubu do that a lot, to be honest, as we've just brilliantly captured in terms of his movement between African Union, with ECOWAS, is the COP29 in Azerbaijan, now is it Rio de Janeiro with the G20 that just concluded, and so on and so forth. And he has also done individual travels to France and other countries. Even when he took holidays, he was supposed to be working holiday and this and that. So the country should be should be glad that I think we have a president that understands the power of shuttle diplomacy, as you've said. But beyond that, though, is we have to start asking a serious question: is what do we intend to gain from all these collaborations, from all these engagements that Nigeria is having overseas, so that it doesn't become traveling for travel's sake, but it becomes something that we can come back with and say, look, I've been to here, I've been here, this and this and this are the consequences that I have. Being shuttle diplomacy, obviously, you're going to have some presence, some awareness, create some awareness about your country globally, and these we're best to do it than these, massive international fora. So I think it's something that should be commended as far as creating awareness for Nigeria is concerned.
It's interesting that you say that Nigerians should be glad and we have a president who thrives on this. But, as I did raise yesterday in conversation with one of the president's senior special assistant on protocol, I was saying that when we look at the credentials of President Bola Tinubu, shuttle diplomacy, or diplomacy, is not one of them. It's not one of his strengths. So there have been questions as to how he's fared, really, in this particular regard, especially when you look at the shaky start he's had as head of ECOWAS and the crisis that immediately greeted ECOWAS when he started. Do you think he's beginning to really get a hang of it and being able to assert himself and also Nigeria's presence on the international stage?
Well, thank you, Mark. I think that's a very brilliant question. Look, you're absolutely right. Let's be honest. In terms of the president's forte you refer to, and the mention of ECOWAS. Look, if you look at what happened during ECOWAS, I think the presidency, I would say, of Nigeria hastily drew a red line for the crisis happening in West Africa, which I thought at that point in time was a very bad idea. I work for African Union as an expert on African Union. I drafted the Treaty for African Union in terms of peace and security. I worked with ECOWAS before. I worked with United Nations. You do not do that hastily. Obama did that, for instance, in Syria, when he talked about the use of nuclear weapon as chemical weapon at that point in time during the internal crisis of Syria, when he drew a red line and he wasn't able to follow up. So you have to be very careful in drawing it. So it's normal for presidents or heads of state to take step forward with the wrong foot, either because of their enthusiasm to grapple with whatever comes before them without having the full benefit of counseling that they should have, either from continental players or from their own particular. I think that was what happened at that point in time. But look, I think the presidency or the president realized that we need to do things differently and embark on this diplomatic charm. That's why I said that we need to be glad for that in terms of at least pushing us forward there. So I think I would say, at least it seems that Nigeria has realized that there is a lot of good thing to be derived from at least pushing our agenda forward, engaging diplomatically with international community, greater than we probably ever did. So you are right in saying that, the president seems to have realized that. I will agree with that thinking.
How big would you say that, interpersonal relationships matter on this fort? Because we've seen, I did make reference to the president's experience. You did not particularly address that in terms of, his experience before now on the international stage. One president whom we did see, never mind the fact that they are loggerheads now, especially when you consider his recent attacks on the administration, President Obasanjo. People know that he's not just a Nigerian figure, he is an African figure. He's got relationships, that span even beyond the continent of Africa. I do not know how that affects his own, his own posturing in terms of pushing the Nigerian agenda, on the African continent and also outside the African continent.
Well, thank you, Mark. I did not just, sidestep that question you asked me. It's because you already mentioned the fact that that was not part of President Asiwaju's sort of a forte. But that is not, it's not a minus at all. And I'll tell you, you did mention President Obasanjo. President Obasanjo was a military head of state. He had trainings overseas. Well, beyond that, when he was the head of state, in Nigeria, he had a lot of engagement with, and that was at a point Nigeria was just stepping out also. And Pan-Africanism, remember, from Murtala Mohammed, was the bulwark of our international relations. So any head of state at that point in time will have to do that, number one. Number two, Obasanjo governed Nigeria from 1976 to 78, thereabout, or 79, thereabout, when most of Africa was still battling with colonialism. So as the head of state of the Africa's largest country, Africa's largest country in terms of population, and towards whom the rest of Africa looked to for kind of support. And the role we played in Zimbabwe, in Southern Rhodesia, the role we played in South Africa. Obasanjo was a part of the EPW, eminent persons of the world, that was very critical in also freeing Mandela in fighting for the end of the apartheid. So the critical moment that Obasanjo found himself in Nigerian politics or leadership from 1970 to 78 on the first instance, and then when we birthed democracy in 1999, gave him a unique opportunity to be able to play that role. Actually, would have done the same thing. Anybody would have done the same thing if you are trusted into the power at that point in time. Now, so when you take a step back, Ashwaji was a governor of Lagos State for about 8 years. Then he was a senator. Those were not two platforms that would give anybody the opportunity to be able to do massive global sort of diplomacy that he's doing now. But now he understands at this critical moment of Nigeria, Nigeria, when it came, Nigeria needed a leader. It just like, let's go back a bit when Obama became the president in America, the first time he became president. The world was in dire need of somebody who could take America out of what America became then, very isolated kind of country that we saw. So at that point, in 2023, we needed a president at least that would take Nigeria to begin to project us beyond what we did then. So that's why I said that it's not, I don't think it will be a minus in his personality that he didn't do that before. But at least for now, history has made it possible for him to be able to do that, which was missing from his original spread.
You just pointed to the United States of America. We know that the appointment of a Secretary of State is something that is very critical to them. That's where presidents get to, even if they do not have that strong. That's not an area of strength for them. The Secretary of State's appointment is usually very critical to how the United States is positioned in terms of how it does its relations. In our own instance, would you say that there are levers that we have really leveraged on to be able to, that the president is really relying on to be able to, make the most of this international outings as is out there?
Well, look, this will be in two ways, to be honest, or two levels, internal and external. Internally, I'm happy you mentioned the role of the Secretary of State in America, which will be our own Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Indeed.
Basically, just like the Minister. So you need somebody who can project the image of the country. I think the current Minister for Foreign Affairs in Nigeria is Ambassador Tuga, who I know personally, when he was Nigeria's ambassador to Germany, and I had the cause to lead a team of Lagos State functionaries to Germany, and I met with him. He's a fine gentleman who I think he knows what he's doing completely. He's a brilliant mind. So I think, and I think that's why we are beginning to see the level of international engagement. A couple of weeks ago, India, the Prime Minister was in Nigeria, and that was the first time an Indian president to come to Nigeria in 17 years. I'm sure you know. Now we just also were present at what is it called, G20. And don't forget, Nigeria is not a member of G20. We were invited by Lula da Silva, the president of Brazil, who was the outgoing president of G20 itself. You know, that can only increase Nigeria's quest for permanent membership of G20 itself. But beyond that also is that Nigeria, as like about 2 or 3 other African countries, are also jostling to become permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. So it was good for Nigeria to be at the G20, because at the end of the day, you are going to be talking to powerful players within the UN General Assembly and UN Security Council who must have your back when you're going to be vying for that particular seat that Nigeria and South Africa and Egypt, at least in Africa, so much covet. So that's what I say, it's both external and internal. So internal, I think we're doing a bit, but we can do a lot more. And I think I said this in my last interview here, that we need to put, I think that was when we were talking about the crisis in terms of Chinese companies going after Nigerians' property and this and that. We need to put our finest mind in places that can actually, project the country's image. I'm not saying we don't do that, but I'm saying we can do a lot more than we seem to have done this.
In one of the things, or one of the statements the president was quoted as making out there, was that the need to fight hunger and poverty. He spoke at the G20. One would then ask, South Africa, and when South Africa became a member, there was that hue and cry, why is it not Nigeria? Why is it South Africa that's out there? Again, you talked about him being there and how it will galvanize Nigeria's movement towards a permanent membership. But some would say, okay, it's done and dusted. What's their outlook? Would you say his statements there and the meetings he's held there would in any way give impetus to that drive to become permanent members?
Well, thank you very much. Let me start with the South Africa being a member and we are not a member.
And now they are the president.
Yeah, they are the president. I listen to that a lot. You see, we seem to confuse things a lot, and we seem to argue too much emotionally in Nigeria when we're talking about facts and figures. South Africa's population is about 1/3 of Nigeria's population. But today, South Africa and Egypt are the largest economies in Africa, albeit just this year, we understand that. But in terms of other indices that global players look at, fight against corruption, transparency, governance, this and that, South Africa is way ahead of us. Don't let's kid ourselves. And these are things that matter when you want to be critical players in international fora. So the fact that South Africa, with 1/3 of Nigeria's population, is accepted as a G20 member, the only country in Africa, by the way, that is in G20, and the only country that is still in BRICS, which is, an offshoot of G20, tells you that you don't need 250 million people to get serious international attention. What is the power of brain than brawn, basically, if you can put it in that way, not in any cheeky manner. So when people are just talking, oh, Nigeria is 250 million, why should South Africa with 70-something million be there? We are not there. Nobody's just looking at how many you are. There was a time, I think a country won, I think a small country won Miss World, and I was joking with a friend that, so what is so special, this and that. And people told me what, mention a country with about 1-something billion people that never won it anyway. It's just to tell me that it's not about just the numerical strength. So globally, they are looking at countries that at least, respect the rule of law, understand what global governance means in terms of fight against corruption, in terms of transparency, creating ease of doing business. So that is one thing we have not done very well in Nigeria. We can't kid ourselves. And that is why South Africa probably will be a favorite in that. But beyond that is the fact that doesn't mean, though, that Nigeria cannot aspire to be a member of G20, permanent member. And that's why I said earlier on that the president's move actually is going to help a lot. At least Nigeria was invited, as a guest, by Lula da Silva. That is going to help our case. And you mentioned the fight against hunger and poverty. On the very first day of G20, Brazil adopted the Global Alliance, to fight hunger and poverty. And Nigeria endorsed that, which was a very good thing to do. We endorsed that we are going to be a critical player. And that is another advantage, another benefit of the participation in G20 by Nigeria. It will give us at least a platform to be able to engage with other international players on the very critical issue of hunger and poverty. And make no mistake, that was deliberate, because if you understand, Lula da Silva, the president of Brazil, who just left as the president of G20, nothing is more dear to his heart than the question of hunger and poverty. If you remember the way he grew up, he was a cobbler, cobbler's son and this and that. So I think for that sake, I think the president, engaging with that is very, very important. Then he also President Tinubu made a declaration, he made a challenge to his colleagues in the G20. And he reeled out what Nigeria wanted, actually, in terms of support, global support for our SMEs, for this, for that, which I think was a good thing to do. But overall, the G20 itself is heavy, on general declarations, but very light on specifics. Because the G20 is, look, it's almost doomed.
But if I may interrupt you. So
almost doomed, why?
I was going to say it's almost doomed in terms of what it can achieve with this particular year's summit. Because don't forget, it's taking place at the background, in the shadow of Donald Trump coming back as the U.S. president. Donald Trump has a natural disdain for multilaterality. We saw that in his very first time, when he distanced the United States, which is the most critical player in NATO. And again, don't forget, before G20, you had Azerbaijan, which is already comatose, because there was no agreement on COP29 about how to raise the almost $1 trillion they need to be able to pay developing countries for this gas whatsoever. So the problem is, and Trump does not really do deal. He doesn't really buy into this environmental
climate change.
That's why I'm saying that the outcome of this year's G20 is going to struggle, because of the fact that you're going to have a president in America, which one of the most, if not, is the most pivotal player, let's be honest. And Russia was not in G20, wasn't present there, don't forget. It's a member, but wasn't there for many reasons that we understand. So Russia was not there. US is not, you are sure US is not going to play ball. G20 was declared on three prongs, multi-dimensions of sustainable development: economics, social, environmental. America will not do environmental under Trump, right? Economic, we are already in trouble. Social, we have evil all over the place. Look at the regional crisis in the Middle East. Hezbollah here, Hamas there, and Israel. Look at Ukraine and Russia. And that is why I said the G20 summit, if care is not taken, may not be able to achieve anything.
So, sorry, Nyota, if I may, I just wanted to quickly take up this. Well, the G20 might not offer much. Well, we're still looking for, and for some people say that maybe it's a carrot that they keep dangling anyway, membership of G20, a permanent seat in the UN. While we're looking to expand, our turf in these areas of international relations, let's take a look at the president's will I say his entourage, and whether there is something that could come of some bilateral relations, because he was invited by President Lula da Silva of Brazil. So I imagine that beyond attending the G20, I want to think that Nigeria also stands to gain by engaging bilaterally with Brazil. And it would seem that also was the thinking with the president's team, looking at the fact that the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Yusuf Tuga, was there, the Minister of Livestock Development, Idi Mukhtar Meha, and the Minister of Art, Tourism and Culture and Creativity, Hanatu Musawa. Minister of Agriculture was also there, Minister of State, beg your pardon, and also the National Intelligence Agency Director, General Ambassador Mohammed. These are the people that followed the president. I'm wondering, what can we think of, and what do you think can be the outcomes of the bilateral engagement that could happen or should have happened on the side of the G20 summit?
Well, thank you very much, Maupri. I think you hit the nail on the head there. That is very important. We must not lose sight of that. I think one thing Nigeria can do, to borrow the title of Arunda Roy's novel a few years ago, is to be a god of small things at the end of the day. The big thing is the G20, but the small things, as Ferrari put it, they are the sort of low-hanging fruit, the side meetings you can have on bilateral level. And what you just read out is a very critical part of our cabinet, so to say, that could do that, could bet that. It also was very interesting that Modi left Nigeria for Brazil for that particular meeting. It was good that he came here first before he went there. So again, Nigeria could carry that relationship with Brazil over there, and with India over there. Brazil, the hosting country, also invited Nigeria. So you could see, and Nigeria has a lot of things to learn from these countries, from India in terms of food security, counter-terrorism, in terms of technology and so on and so forth. From Brazil, the same thing, but much more so in terms of environmental protection, as an example. Brazil is the home to the world's largest Amazon forest, as you know, and they're doing a fantastic deal, on that. And don't forget, Joe Biden did not only attend that summit, he also visited Amazon, becoming the first sitting president in America to visit the Amazon. That is very important. So Nigeria has, a very huge opportunity to be able to do that. And that's to leverage on all those opportunities afforded by that particular group or G20 summit to be able to pursue unilateral and bilateral relationships in terms of investment, FDI, foreign direct investment into Nigeria. Having said that, however, let's forget that Nigeria is not in short of people want to invest in the country. I ran investment for Lagos State for 4 years, and I knew how many potential fantastic investors we could have had in Lagos. But at the end of the day, part of the problem is not having an enabling environment for them to be able to do business. When you have multi, tax regimes, when you have, a lot of bottlenecks in terms of bureaucracies and this and that, it pisses everybody off at the end of the day. No investor is interested in that. So it's not so much of how many of these, side, deals you can do, how many people you can talk to. What is important is when it comes to the crunch, your country can show that it is able and ready for these people to come and do business in your country. I think that for me is very important.
Indeed, that's the question I was going to ask you. I mean, if the G20 is all about all those conversations and then the things that you do in-house, if your house is not clean, would they be willing to come in? So now that the G20 is done, we've seen the entourage the president went with. And of course, they've had the conversations. What do you think needs to be done in-house to create accountability, transparency, the kind of environment needed for all of these conversations to, settle and bear fruit, if we could describe it?
Thanks for that. As I've always said, I've said it on this platform and other places over and over. Whenever people are attacking, not just President Asiwaju or this current government, even previous governments, I've always told them, look, you have to learn to separate the wheat from the chaff. Some of the policies of the current government, do we need those policies? As far as I'm concerned, we do need them. We need them. No country can be using 95% of its GDP to service debt and last much longer. You need those ones. No question about it. Do we need to remove subsidy? All the candidates agree we need them. What is important, though, to your question, is that when we are putting policies out, and I'll bring into it, when you are asking people to come and invest in your country, there are things you need to do to make them want to come to this country and invest. When you are telling people that my government means well for you, then I must see that I must look at you and believe that not by what you are telling me, but what you are doing. So if you have political leadership, living recklessly, living lives that lives that do not mirror what the majority of Nigerians are living today, nobody's going to take us serious. We don't even take ourselves seriously. Because if a politician comes to me today and talks to me about the need for me to tighten my belt and this and that, and I'm looking at you are buying an SUV of 200 million naira a day, you are earning 35 million naira in office and this and that, I'll be looking at, are you really feeling my pain? So if I don't take you seriously as a Nigerian within the country, how much more somebody that is coming from outside the country? And a perfect example of that was what we saw in the botched relationship between Ogun State and the Chinese industry and the whole opera that it threw up in our face. Nigeria should not be, at that level today that, just companies, even if you are multinational, or even individual nationals, human beings of another country, they're going to be attacking your property all over the place. But the truth is, as the Yorubas adage say, I'm saying to Yoruba, is that if you're an elder and you belt yourself with a corn belt, then you make yourself a ridiculous object for the hens to come and peck at. Pure and simple. Nigeria is lowering itself too much. We are ridiculing ourselves, and that is what we need to stop. Nobody will take us seriously if we continue on this trajectory.
All right. Thank you very much. Professor Ademola Abbas is a global affairs expert and international law expert. Thank you for speaking with us this morning.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And that is where we'll have drawn the curtains for this morning. I want to say thank you for letting us be a part of your morning. Of course, you'll be thinking about the feedback tomorrow.
Indeed. Tomorrow is Friday. We'll sit on the producer's neck.
Thank you so much. I'm Nelta Igwe.
Thank you. Wishing you a very productive day. I'm Mal Pelgrim.